In this episode of Titans of ServiceNow, we interview Chris York, oldest of old-school ServiceNow experts and Chief Simplification Officer of Lumagent. Tons of links in the description below, so be sure to check them out. Titans of Now reaches a broad audience of ServiceNow developers and customers, so if you'd like to sponsor this content, please check out the sponsorship email below. If you want to know what I'm up to lately, I invite you to check out Vivid Charts and stop exporting data off platform for reporting. Hey everyone, welcome back to Titans of ServiceNow. My name is Robert Fedoruk. It is so good to have you here. Folks, today I have someone who was trained by none other than Fred Luddy himself. He's a longtime mover and shaker in the ServiceNow ecosystem. I'm so proud to have won a hackathon with him. He is the owner of Lumagent. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris York.
Hey Robert, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for showing up, man. I really appreciate it. So the way this usually works is we start at the start. So why don't you tell us how you got your start in the ServiceNow space?
Well, since you introduced me as being trained by Fred Luddy himself, I should probably start there.
Kind of blew the punchline for you, huh?
There you go. So I've been in the IT service management space for quite a long time, for over 20 years. And I was a consultant implementing the HP Paragon products when Fred started ServiceNow. So he was looking for ServiceNow partners. We knew each other at our Paragon days. So he reached out and we connected. So he flew out to Colorado, which is where I live. He sat side by side with me at my desk. We had our laptops and I spent about half a day with Fred, him showing me glide records and scripting and manipulating the platform. And my mind was blown, to say the least, right? I fell in love with it within the first hour. There was no turning back after that. That was back in 2004. And I still had customers on the HP Paragon product, so I had to transition. It took me about a year and a half to get my customers transitioned over, but eventually I was doing nothing but ServiceNow.
Wow. Fred flew out to you, sat at your table. Wow.
He did. It was a wild experience. I had no idea, hindsight's 2020, obviously, but if I could go back in time and capitalize on that moment, I definitely would have done things a lot differently.
Oh yeah, how would you have done it differently?
I probably would have said, "Hey Fred, let me join up with ServiceNow and be part of the company instead of just partner with the company." But at the time, there was less than 10 employees. David, Lou, and Bo, and the original gang was all there, but that was about it.
I remember, like, for us, they had grown a little bit, but I remember being at the big wooden spaceship when it was empty, and they were like, "This is where all the desks are going to go." And
imagine this, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we didn't even, we knew it was awesome, but who would have thought it would grow so big? Hey, listen, when you had that first exposure to it, what really grabbed you?
The flexibility and the speed of development, because the platforms I was working on at the time, they were your traditional enterprise apps where it takes weeks and months to do simple things. And you could do those in minutes on the platform. And it was kind of evident because I was literally in the middle of projects where I would take a task that I had to do on this other platform. And I asked Fred, okay, how would you do that exact same scenario that I just tried to do before you showed up here? And he would just whip it out in a few minutes. And it was just mind-opening for me.
Did you get the idea of it being bigger than IT in those first few moments?
I didn't. No, I wish I could say I had the foresight for that, but I was still in that IT world, entrenched in there. I'll tell you another story that really showed the power of the platform. So at the time, the product didn't have very much in it as far as out-of-the-box applications. There was incident management, change management, CMDB. That was about it. That's all there was. We went to one of my existing customers and I was working on a service catalog project for them, and we showed them. Fred Luddy actually and I flew out together. The two of us we're in their conference room. He's demoing the product himself to them, and they said, "That looks great and all, but does it do this?" And they described what a service catalog was at that time, back in 2004. It wasn't widely known. And Fred said, "It doesn't do that now, but can I come back and do another demo for you tomorrow?" So we arranged a demo for the next day, because this was in the afternoon. So Fred literally went back to his hotel room, built Service Catalog, and demoed it to them the next day. And what he built was the basics of what's in the platform today, with the whole rec and rhythm and SC tasks and all of that. That was built that night.
Chris York, first eyes to see the service catalog.
Again, my mind was blown. I'm like, he built an application overnight. I don't know how long he spent on it. Fred probably only maybe an hour or two, but
And I guess it was running because they didn't have workflow back then, right? They had execution plans.
yeah, it was delivery plans, execution plans,
Oh,
business rules, all that was there.
they don't know the pain, these youngins, do they? I mean, brilliant for its time, but you imagine building workflow with no GUI.
Oh yeah.
So tell me about a moment where you did see the writing on the wall, where you're like, holy cow, this is bigger than what IT can imagine.
It's probably because the platform was so light in the beginning. Almost every implementation project I was on required a custom application to be built. And in the early days of ServiceNow, as you may recall, the licensing model was extremely simple. It was a flat per user fee for everything, right? You can build as many custom apps as you wanted. So that opened the door to, oh, hey, you have this Excel spreadsheet over there. You have this app built on whatever tool. We started absorbing everything we could into ServiceNow because we could. It didn't increase the license count at all, and it was easy to build it. And it was a no-brainer. And that started opening my eyes to, hey, we can build anything. I remember just the wild stuff I'd build in the early days. I remember I was doing a project for a company that had a private fleet of planes for their executives to jet around the country. And they had a hangar and they needed a way to manage the reservation system for the airplanes. And so we built it on ServiceNow. You can go reserve a plane and you can order catering to be delivered to the plane at 3 o'clock for takeoff at 3:30 type of thing. And we put all that in the application, and even things like maintenance tasks recurring, like once a month you need to oil the hangar doors and you need to mow the grass around the runway every week type of thing. All of that was built into this application. Something I would have never imagined in a million years that you'd build on an IT app.
So that was an early app that you made with the platform. Tell us about one of your favorite apps that you've seen done.
As I evolved with the product and companies get bigger and projects get bigger, I'm actually building less and less custom apps. It's more about getting people to use what's already there. And it's been a major shift over the years, coming up from where everything's custom to now you try not to make anything custom. It's taken a long time to get there.
Where do you draw the line? Because I've always embraced both sides of that coin. What I do say is don't get in ServiceNow's way. I probably built one of the first project management apps, figuring they'd never go project management. And eventually they did. So naturally you want to use what they're packaging. But what if, do you still hold that philosophy when you're talking about some customer specific operational app?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely have had that same experience. You spend a lot of time building an app and then ServiceNow comes out with their own version of it and it makes yours look like child's play, right? Based on their resources versus you. And that's natural to happen in certain domains. But as soon as you start reaching out into those non-IT domains, I think those opportunities are much more obvious to be able to take that application and build it on the platform without the risk of ServiceNow coming out with their own release of that. Yeah, I don't think they're coming out with an airplane hangar reservation system anytime soon, right?
True enough. But they did come up with ideation.
That is true.
So for those of you who don't know, Chris and I were 2 of 7-person team in 2013 who won a hackathon building an ideation engine. We tried to build Kickstarter in ServiceNow.
I still think that's a good idea. We've never commercialized on that, but it seems like a good application to have.
I feel like they're almost there, right? Minus some of the social aspects we put in or the really cool front end. But they have the concepts of volunteering resources and volunteering cost and that kind of stuff.
Well, I don't think it matches most corporate cultures, right? For this concept of having the ability to take part of your budget and donate it to a pet project, I don't think that's the real world scenario. It sounds good, right? We think of the Google 10%, you spend your extra time on things that you want to work on, but most organizations just aren't there.
I have seen that dynamic play out a number of times too, and building for this ideal we have in our head versus building for a reality that exists.
Well, that's what's so fun about hackathons, right? You can just build what you want and how you want it to work and don't have to operate in the real world. You're constantly hamstrung though by requirements that, really limit the potential of an application, I think sometimes because of corporate cultures or dynamics or organizational challenges. You rarely get an opportunity to build an app the way it needs to be built. and you have to build it in the culture that you're working for at the time.
Let's lean into that a little bit. You built for reality and not for an ideology, or built for reality and not an ideal.
I'll try to think of some specific examples as I'm talking here, but just in general, it seems to be because everything I do as a consultant is project based, right? You have a statement of work that's driving the work, and you have a set of deliverables that you have to build towards. So you have this conflict of interest, right? You want to get paid because you want to match your statement of work and deliver what you said you're going to deliver, and then the customer has project requirements, right? We have to get these things done in a certain amount of time with a certain amount of resources. So you always have these constraints around the project that tends to limit what you can actually do. Now, I'm not talking about like over engineering something so it's this perfect model. It's more about just having the flexibility to go any direction you need to based off of what's actually happening. Taking on that more agile approach and a lean thinking approach where you have an experiment, you build something to test your hypotheses, collect the actual results from it, and then you iterate off of that, where it seems like you're trying to define your requirements based off of these parameters and build something that's deliverable instead of experimenting. Probably rambled a little bit there, but did that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I find there's such tension in my mind. Once you've been in the consulting seat long enough, you go place to place to place, you learn something over and over and over again, and you're like, okay, it's at least common practice, if not best practice. So you start forming a corpus of knowledge of things you could take somewhere, and then you come into another environment and you say, just do this, it's best practices. But then at some point that calcifies and becomes too rigid, and then you're not dealing with the reality on the ground anymore.
Yeah, I totally get that. I'm right there with you. I think everybody is trying to seek for this holy grail of best practice when they really should be striving towards what's my best practice, not what the standard best practice is, right? Frankly, I don't care what other people are doing. I want to know, I want to compare myself to myself or my company to my company, right? Here's how my operations worked last month. Here's, my mean time to resolution. Here's how many cases I closed. Whatever metric you're measuring, that's your metric. Now let's do something to improve it and compare our own operations to what we did last month. So many people are striving towards comparing themselves to others that it's just kind of a race towards mediocrity.
Well, how do you know what the scope of their operation was, right? Like, we struggled with this in the first customer where I was a ServiceNow customer. We had this team come in and they're like, we're way more expensive than IT in other advertising brands. And I'm like, yeah, but we do everything, like white glove out the wazoo, right? If somebody picks up the phone, we come running. We have Black Helicopter Assault Commando support. And so how are you going to take their cost per unit and our cost per unit and say we're worse?
Yeah, it's not a fair comparison at all, is it?
Yeah, the units are different, basically. I mean, maybe it's the fact I'm just getting older and more gray hairs too. It's just, there's nothing as rigid as you think it is. Having the open mind and the ability to observe and react is more important than anything.
I have a line I always tell my clients, it's called software, not hardware. Right?
Nice.
It's okay. We can change it, right? This is what we know with the knowledge we have today. Let's put it in place. It might not be perfect. It might not be the final solution, but that's okay. We can change it tomorrow. And I think getting people past this concept of they got to get things perfect is a real challenge. People want to overanalyze things. They want to put in the perfect solution, put the minimum out there and test it and get the data back and then change it after that.
Yeah, or they think they'll only ever get that one project. It's like, no, this thing's going to grow. So I noticed on your LinkedIn profile for a long time, you've had the title Chief Simplification Officer. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah, and that title actually, I've had it for a while. It came about because of knowledge, actually. You know how when you're filling out your registration for a knowledge event, you have to put your title. Well, if you're a one-man freelance company, you don't really have a title, right? You do everything. So I never really had a title for myself. So I sat there thinking one day, I got to come up with a title for this application form. And I started thinking about what I actually do. And half of my day is spent trying to battle this complexity versus simplicity ongoing battle that's always there. So I came up with the Chief Simplification Officer.
So you're definitely picking a side in that war, huh?
Absolutely. I think simplicity wins any day over complexity. And you've probably seen this in every industry, in every business, no matter what you're doing. They try to make things overly complex,
Right, right.
and for no other reasons than maybe they're trying to justify their jobs, maybe they're trying to justify something, or maybe they just feel that they got to overanalyze things. But just simplify, just say no, get rid of things. I spend a lot of my time taking things off of the forms and taking things out of workflows and instead of adding things.
Yeah, I think it comes from that what if place. Like, what if this happens? What if somebody needs to report off of that and they have kind of extraneous stuff? And what I try and tell people is like a space shuttle is really complex, but it also has one job and it has absolutely nothing else extra but to do that job.
Yeah, and it's a very specific use case. Well, and I look at something like the kiosk to check in at the airport. It's usually a pretty simple interface. It's stripped down, and it has one job to check you in and get you a boarding pass, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have only what you need on the form. But think about the complexity behind the scenes. I'm sure there's massive systems and workflows and databases and other things that have to integrate with that to make it work. But the
Mm-hmm.
user interface is very simple. And that's what I'm striving towards with ServiceNow is I want simple user interfaces, simple use cases, one task purpose things, and then all the complications you hide behind the scenes in the automation and the workflow.
Do you do much with CMDB at all?
Yeah, CMDB is part of every project naturally.
It seems like like everybody wants to take it to that nth level of complexity right away, right? Let's discover everything and their relationships. So how do you bring some complexity to a CMDB deployment?
I'm a big lean student. I love studying the principles of lean and the Toyota systems, that originated in lean in here. But basically, I had this concept called the 5 whys. You have kids, right? So
Yep.
think about when your kids were 2 and 3, and they just asked why over everything. Why, and they just keep taking it to the nth level. You keep doing the same thing when somebody says, okay, we need to collect this information or we need to track this detail. My first question is why? They can usually come up with an answer for that. And then whatever that answer is, you ask why again. Eventually you'll get down to, well, actually, we don't actually need this anymore, or it doesn't make sense, right? That's why I was saying sometimes I spend half my day saying no or taking things out because I'm trying to convince people that that's not actually necessary to do that. And it often starts with the 5 why exercise.
I'm going to soundbite that one, the 5 whys. Is that a Chris York thing or is that a lean ideology?
No, that's a lean thing. I didn't make that up. Everything I know I got from someone else. I have no original thoughts.
Well, I mean, we're all kind of aggregates of the things that we've put into our brain, but it takes something special to synthesize it and output it into something that's more refined. That's everybody's gift to each other. So if anybody was interested in like learning more about lean, do you have any like materials or books that you'd recommend as kind of a primer to lean?
Yeah, for sure. I have lots of books. I love books. I read probably a book every week or two. I'm a lifelong learner, and that's how I learn the best is I read and then I go try to apply it. A little bit about my background in case you don't know. I'm a 3-time college dropout, never graduated. So I've attempted college 3 times, but never found the will to finish it up because it's just not the way I learn. I can't sit in a classroom and go through the course material that way. It's just not me. I love to read instead. So I'd have to go through my books, but off the top of my head, I'm the Lean Startup, which is really taken lean applied to the entrepreneurial startup communities. Something else that I found that has helped me tremendously is this concept of job to be done. Well, I first learned about it from the late Harvard professor Clayton Christensen. I don't know if he coined it. There's some debate about who actually coined that term or not, but essentially you have to look beyond what people are asking for and try to figure out what's the underlying job that they're trying to accomplish, or what are they hiring a product or service to do for them to accomplish. And I use that concept all the time, and there's several books around that I can recommend.
Like I love finding ServiceNow talent that didn't come up in IT or at least had something outside of IT that really informed their approach to ServiceNow. You've obviously been in IT a long time. You came up with the Peregrine systems, but something else that was nothing to do with IT that really informed how you approached your ServiceNow journey.
I did start in IT. I've been a technology nerd my whole life. In middle school, I was playing with computers. In high school and My first real job out of high school was working for a computer retailer and doing computer installs and stuff. And then my first real job outside of that was working in IT on a help desk. So that's actually where I did start. But it wasn't until I started learning about the process underneath things and service management, IT service management, that the light bulb went off on and said, you know what, technology is great as an enabler, but you can't solve the problems with just technology alone. And that's where I really started honing my consulting practice, and really where I position myself is that perfect blend between process and culture and technology all mixed together to form the right solution. Because if you're too heavy on one or the other, it's not going to be a good solution. I think half of my ServiceNow projects are cleaning up failed ServiceNow implementations, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the technology. You and I both can attest to how great the platform is. So what makes a ServiceNow implementation fail? It's not the platform, and it's all those soft skills behind there that I think people are lacking at the moment. So, and just recognizing when to use the technology and when not to use it, when to say no and when to say yes. And that's something that didn't happen overnight, though. It's something that's happened over years and years of trial and experience, which is how I learn best, right? Try something. If it doesn't work, try something else until it does.
We're obviously in the middle of knowledge, so we're going to get a keynote really soon about what's coming up in the next version. What are you most excited about?
You know, I really hope there's a bigger emphasis on the application portfolio management, and I think it's called continual service management or continual improvement management. I can't remember the exact name. These are areas that are relatively new in the platform that don't have a lot of emphasis, I think, at the moment. But I think there's tremendous potential on them. There's a lot of waste out in the environments out there. You know, people have hundreds of applications that have all these crossover points that do the same things, but they're not aware of it. Bringing awareness to that and opportunity to improve continuously, I think is really important.
I'm a big fan of APM. Have you done an implementation of it yet?
I haven't, and that's one of the things I'm excited about. I've played around with it in my own demo environments, and I've studied it and practiced using it, and I'm waiting for a customer that's mature enough to actually implement it successfully. I'm finding that a lot of organizations just aren't quite there yet. It takes an appetite to be able to bite that off to say, yeah, we're going to take on application portfolio management. If you think about it, there's all these sunk costs into applications, and people have existing organizations and resources invested into them. By making it transparent that there's waste there, you're exposing things that people don't want exposed. It takes a unique person to be able to willingly take on that exposure.
Right. I jokingly call APM the final boss of ServiceNow because it just seems like you've got to have a whole bunch of other stuff right first. But man, what a use case once you do, to just look at your whole organization's apps and when do we have to make a decision on what we're going to do with these things? Where's the duplication? Where are we exposed? I think it's a brilliant use case. I think you could almost sell the entire platform off of that as a journey. You do this, and this right, you get to do APM.
This pandemic with COVID-19 forcing this economic shutdown essentially, and this downturn of our economy is going to really open the opportunities for things like APM. Because as companies start tightening their belts and their budgets are shrinking, they're going to have to look for opportunities to save dramatically. And I think that's an opportunity for them, is to look at all their application portfolio, identify the waste, and be able to streamline that. And they're operating much more lean. While the pandemic is not a good thing, it's going to have some good benefits, I think, because of where it's going to draw people's attention to and force people to focus on becoming more efficient.
I pray for everybody's safety and health and well-being during this time, but from a long-term societal perspective, there's no growth without that kind of challenge. I remember a time when people were talking about, like, is ServiceNow, like, if it goes public, doesn't have enough emphasis to go, and I'm like, this is the good times, man. And ServiceNow was rocketing out of, like, it was skyrocketing when the housing crisis was going on. Like, everybody
Right.
thought that the economy was just going to go away, but their ServiceNow just like climbing up the ladder. And it's just because it kind of always has that cost saving / automation / more efficiency angle to it, which makes it at least somewhat recession proof in my opinion.
Yeah, to actually even grow during recessions where other people would be cutting back, ServiceNow is an opportunity to spend money on automation. People are still going to have money. they might have headcount freezes where they can't hire employees or they have to cut back certain departments. And that's where you got to have the automation take over.
All right, Chris, it was a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks again for coming. I will leave the last word for you. So if there's any words of encouragement you would give to the people coming up, or important lessons you've learned, or anything that you would change about the ecosystem.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you having me, Robert. I'm glad to be here. And as far as the last word, I think I'll take what you said there and a word for those people coming up. I think back to early on in my career as a consultant and learning ServiceNow. I'd find myself in situations where, a customer would ask me, hey, can you implement this, or can you do this feature, or do you have any experience with this particular module? Half the time the answer was no, but I would say, nope, but I can learn it. And I'd spend some time cramming before the project and learning it and just getting there and figuring it out. So you need some confidence in your learning ability and your ability to grasp new things and apply them. So don't be worried about, hey, I don't know that, so I'm going to steer away from it. I don't know anything about CMDB, so I'm not going to take on a CMDB project because of that. I would say let go of your fear and jump into the deep end with both feet.
Wise words. Thanks again for coming, Chris. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me, Robert.
If you'd like to sponsor this channel's content, contact me via the email address pictured here. If you'd like to contribute to high-quality, high-frequency content, consider a donation. If not, I still appreciate your viewership. Consider hitting the like button and sharing with your network. See the description for relevant links. Thanks for watching.